My next guest is Senator Sherrod Brown from Ohio. He is the chairman of the Senate Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee. Welcome, Senator Brown.
Good to be with you. Thanks, Sylvan.
Thanks. So I wanted to kick off by asking you a pretty simple question. What are you hearing about the economy and how good or bad it is from your constituents?
Well, people in Ohio recognize that we have strong economic growth, and people even occasionally will say, we've heard our GDP is growing faster than China's. That's the good news. The bad news is people are very concerned about inflation. And people in Ohio understand they understand the betrayal of American corporations having that companies for a generation and a half now have scoured the globe looking for low wages. And first they went to Alabama, they shut down production in Ohio and go to Alabama. Then that wasn't cheap enough labor. Then they forced through a trade agreement with NAFTA with Mexico, and that wasn't cheap enough labor. And then they'd move overseas to China. And we're paying the price for that as those companies betrayed us. That's a big part of what's caused inflation now. It's a big part of why home builders couldn't find lumber and we couldn't get enough we couldn't get enough semiconductors, and semiconductors invented in this country, and only about 10% of them are made here now. Light bulbs invented this country, LED bulbs, 99% of them are made in China. You can just list the number of components manufacturing. And we were a country that made things. Ohio absolutely has always been a state that's made things. But people recognize what corporate interests have done lobbying their Congress and their presidents and betrayed workers in so many cases.
Now, speaking of making things in Ohio, I know you and your colleague from Ohio, Senator Rob Portman, just hosted President Biden recently in your home state. Can you tell me a little bit about why President Biden was in town and, what your goals are working with Senator Portman on your innovation legislation?
Yeah, he recognizes that President Biden recognizes that Ohio is, if not the number one manufacturing state in the country, certainly the top two or three. He also has recognized that we are now burying the term Rust Belt. I used that term with him a couple of months ago during the announcement of the Intel expansion into Ohio. He mentioned it in the State of the Union that we're burying Rust Belt, the term Rust Belt. How we're burying it with Intel, we're burying it with NASA Glenn and Cleveland, we're burying it with manufacturing, the manufacturing camps in the America Works manufacturing in Youngstown and in Dayton and Cincinnati. And he was there to point that out, to celebrate that, and to show that there's going to be a real focus on making things, and it really is putting workers at the center of our economy. For years, unfortunately, under presidents of both parties, from George Bush Sr. up through Trump. Corporate interests ran this government, and for the first time, we have a president that's putting workers at the center of our economy. And we have a Senate now that's doing the same. We still recognize corporate profits are the highest since 1950. We recognize that CEO pay has just exploded upwards while most workers' wages have been flat. We recognize that many companies, especially oil and pharmaceutical and shipping, and meatpacking, have used the pandemic to jack up their own prices way higher than inflation. So that's in part what's driven inflation. That's not the whole story, of course, but all of those things are coming together in a way that we've got to start putting workers first. We start focusing on inflation. We start focusing on those industries that have especially violated the public trust.
And when it comes to fighting inflation, there's only a few months left before we start to really get into the midterm election season when legislation tends to grind to a halt in Washington. I was wondering if there's anything that you think that President Biden, in cooperation with Senate and House Democrats, can still do at this point to bring prices down.
I think the most important thing we do, the Federal Reserve is obviously involved in that. I think the president needs to use the bully pulpit on those companies that have especially violated the public trust. And, using one CEO bragged about good pricing momentum. He should be called out on that. It's a CEO that talking about this is our opportunity to raise prices even more and to make even bigger profits. As I said, biggest profits since 1950. We do a windfall profits tax where we rebate directly to consumers. One of the things we do on the Innovation Competition Act is it's about making things in America, and we want to show with the infrastructure bill, with this legislation, the competitiveness, the Invest Innovation Competitiveness Act, that we focus on manufacturing and focus on making things here.
Now, speaking more about making things in America, I know housing has been a big priority of yours since you took over the chairmanship of the committee. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the, ambitious proposal that President Biden and Democrats came out with to expand affordable housing. That was linked to the president's Build Back Better plan. And as I'm sure you know well, there's a little bit of uncertainty about whether or not that's going to move forward. Do you think that there's a pathway to making some sort of progress, whether through a reconciliation bill or through a bipartisan measure, to really kind of tackle the shortfall of affordable housing we have in this country?
Absolutely. I just spoke a moment ago I met with the Federal Home Loan Bank Board out of Cincinnati, and they're a three-state entity, if you will. They're made up of bankers and public members also, and their focus is founded by Herbert Hoover, of all people, right before Roosevelt took office, and it's made a difference in helping provide more affordable housing for people. These were some very small towns like Adams County on the Ohio River. One woman was from Cleveland. So we're people from sort of all parts of the state and all demographics of the state. And we've got to focus on constructing affordable, accessible housing for people. We haven't done that enough. What we were doing in that former proposal is part of this. But I think as we begin to bring supply chains back home, we begin to make more in this country. You will see the focus again return to housing, which is everything from building wealth generation to generation to providing just a decent place for kids to be raised and go to school. It all starts with an affordable home.
Certainly. Now, I want to shift gears a little bit to another part of the committee's beat, which is financial markets. I know you've been very, very concerned over the course of your career about investor protections, consumer protections, making sure folks know what's going to happen to their money and know what's going on with it. And over the past few years, we've seen a very large influx of Americans into the stock market, into cryptocurrency markets. And over the past few months, we've seen a lot of those values start to shake up a little bit, a lot of turmoil in markets. Do you think that Americans right now are well protected against the potential risks of a deeper financial downturn?
I think we have done a reasonably good job recently in making sure that banks are well capitalized. I've pushed the Federal Reserve and the controller of the currency and the FDIC and other regulators to pay more attention to that. I think in the Trump years they were pretty lax, but now those regulators understand that there's not going to be another bank bailout. I think in the Trump years there would have been another bank bailout, frankly, because that president would have wanted us to do that if there had been a problem. They're better capitalized, but in many cases they're not strong enough. We have to, we see things like companies continue to do stock buybacks, continuing to reward their executives. It used to be 25-1 executive compensation versus as a ratio with average pay of that company, and now those numbers are almost a factor of 10 times that, in some cases 250, 300-1. I think we use whatever mechanism we can to make sure that this economic growth is shared by everyone, and it hasn't been in the last 20 years in this country. And my commitment has always been to turn that around.
Senator Brown, Chairman of the Senate Banking Committee, thank you so much for joining me today.
We'll do it again. Thanks very much, Sylvan.